Hello and welcome. My name is Afar Iqbal, and you are watching the Mojo Story. We saw those dramatic images on our television screens, the ship that collided with a bridge, and that led to the fall of that bridge. Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge suffered that catastrophic collapse after the massive freight ship collided with it. It caused chaos and tragedy, and now there are reports that the rescue operation has been stopped for now. There are reports that 6 people are feared dead. They were the workers on the bridge at that point in time when the ship collided with that bridge. You can see from those images the ship that collided with the bridge and that led to its fall. This was a container ship Dali with a full cargo. It rammed onto this concrete bridge and one of the pillars, and that led to its fall. Now, there are reports that the President of America, Joe Biden, has commended local authorities for their swift response. He's praised the crew of the ship, all of whom are Indian nationals. Now, before hitting at the bridge, they had put out a distress message, which helped the authorities at that point in time to stop the traffic on the bridge, and that saved lives because of that distress message that was sent. To discuss this, we're joined by our guest, Commodore Bhaskar, who joins us. Welcome to the show, sir. If I may start with you, that we saw this image. What happened here was that the ship really rammed onto that bridge, and that led to its collapse. Now that later we got to know that all of them, the crew members, were Indians. So was it really a technical failure that led to it, but the distress message that they sent possibly prevented the damage from happening? It could have been much more than that.
Zafar, I'm
If you can
confirming
unmute, sir.
satisfactory.
Yeah,
One
it's
second.
okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's okay. It's
Okay.
okay.
So I think,
Yes, I
Zafar,
can hear you. Yeah,
if you can hear me, I'm saying it is
yeah,
a coincidence that all the crew members were Indian. So there seems to be a lot
right,
of focus on that particular aspect. But otherwise, I'd
right.
like to place this in context and say that
Yeah,
this particular ship, the Dali, is part of a very large global merchant fleet. It has a
right,
certain ownership, it has a certain cargo, in this case from Baltimore to Colombo. And it's
yeah,
a coincidence that all the crew members are Indian. But if you
right,
look at the sequence of events, as you have
right.
rightly pointed out, a
Yeah,
very major tragedy was averted by the timely action of the crew
yeah,
and the fact that they were experiencing one of the rarest of rare
yeah,
exigencies at sea, which is where a
yeah,
vessel, a
yeah.
merchant vessel, has the equivalent of total power failure. Now, I'm sure there'll be
Right,
an investigation to find out why it happened. But when this
right,
happens, the ship is blind, the ship
right,
is deaf. And despite this, if you look at the timing, it was in the early hours, it was pitch dark. And if you see Baltimore,
right,
it's a fairly busy port. It's on the East Coast.
right,
It is at number
right,
17 if you look at America's top 20 ports. And it has a
right,
large container traffic on the East Coast. So I
right.
think, to the credit of the crew, they were able to use what is called as the emergency distress signal, the Mayday. And that
Yeah,
in
made
turn
it.
was picked up by the local Maryland authorities. And very quick
Yeah,
action was taken to stop the vehicular traffic. Now, I'd like to
yeah,
place this in context for our viewers.
yeah,
If you've been to Baltimore, I'm sure some of the viewers may know Baltimore by personal
right,
experience. This particular bridge had a traffic of about 30,000 cars every
right,
day. 30,000. So if you look at it in terms of per hour, we are talking about a very high automobile density. And to the credit again of the local authorities manning the port and the bridge, they were
Right.
immediately able to suspend and stop all traffic. That, I
Right.
think, averted a much bigger disaster, though the fact that some lives have been lost, cars had gone into the water, is cause for great concern. But I think there are more investigations,
Yeah.
and the report when it comes will be put in this manner.
Right.
Zafar?
Right. Yeah. Commander Uday Bhaskar, the point here is that they put out this distress message and it was picked up promptly and then the action followed. I think all the SOPs were properly put in place to prevent further damage. Although there are six people who are workers on the bridge who are feared dead because the operation has been stopped now. It's extremely cold, the
Zafar,
waters are
just repeat your
cold.
last. I seem to have lost you.
I'm saying that, sir, the distress message that was put out was promptly followed up by people on the ground who stopped the traffic, and that is what prevented the damage on a bigger scale. All those six workers are feared that because now that the operation has been stopped, it's extremely cold waters, and it's not possible to for the divers to stay there for long and to bring them out. But clearly, the damage could have been much more. So do you think that all the SOPs were followed? In this particular case, the ship went blind, they put out a message, and that was picked up, and the chain, it followed through in the chain in the best possible way that an SOP can be carried out.
I would agree with you. I think, in as much as this is a tragic occurrence, I think the SOPs, the standard operating procedures that are normally in place for such exigencies, were followed. The first step was that the crew were able to send out the distress signal on that particular frequency, what is called as Mayday. Everyone in the vicinity can pick up a Mayday signal. This is the
Yeah,
standard, I would say, code
yeah,
at sea and in ports. Normally, you don't have such events in a port. That's why I said it is the rarest of the rare kind of occurrence. But once the
yeah,
signal went out, Maryland, the Port Authority, and those who look after the bridge, the transportation department, and the local fire and the people who provide assistance in such cases were all alerted, and they were
yeah,
all on standby. And you're right, it is very sad that the night crew who were doing a construction job had
yeah,
fallen and they could not be saved. And this is indeed, I think, a tragedy. And some cars apparently were also lost. I don't think we
yeah,
have the
yeah,
exact
yeah,
number. But
yeah,
yes, there was some damage. But I think this is important to underline that every such situation, particularly where there is human life involved, you need SOPs, standard operating procedures, and
yeah,
everyone should be alerted, particularly when you have the equivalent of cars crossing a bridge. Similarly, if you know New York and other parts of the United States, I mean, frankly, many major city, where you have the equivalent of rapid transport, say in the case of
yeah,
New York and other cities, you have
right,
the tunnels and the tracks that go underwater.
right,
They go under the river. Now, all these
yeah,
have to be in a way planned that if you have a worst case scenario, what should be the drill for every person there, whether it's a
yeah,
passenger, whether it is the driver of a train or
yeah,
the captain of a ship or the master of a tug, as I said, depending on the nature of the accident or the exigency. So this, I would say, is to be underlined. And I'm just actually getting a message which I saw on social media that apparently the US president,
yeah, yeah,
Mr. Joe Biden, has
yeah,
also acknowledged
yeah,
the alertness of the crew on the Dali. And I
yeah,
think this is something to be applauded, that
yeah.
despite the nature of what must have happened on that ship that night, they were able to put it out. I think this is also a fact to be underlined and acknowledged. Zafar Sab?
Right. Yeah. In fact, President Joe Biden has, put out that message, and he has said talked about the crew members. All of them were coincidentally Indians. But of course, after this incident, there's always an investigation that is started, which will be done. And would there be lessons that will be learned, not just there, but everywhere? How those SOPs can be followed to the last point, and how damage can be scaled down or prevented. It may not be stopped altogether, but things can be restricted.
No, definitely. I think there would be a very rigorous kind of review, because there are a number of ports in the world where a merchant ship of this type, particularly with containers, would be transiting a passage that has a bridge. I can
Yeah,
think of many ports in the world. Some bridges are collapsible, meaning that
yeah,
depending on the size of the ship, you can
yeah,
collapse a bridge to allow the transit. In some
yeah,
cases, they ensure that the tide is properly understood and studied so that the draft is of a level that allows the safe passage of that particular ship. So ships transiting waterways where there are bridges is a fairly common pattern in many ports of the world. What this particular accident would do, the Baltimore accident, is, I think, put in place a very rigorous review by all the authorities concerned, those at sea, the merchant fleet, those who manage the ports and the bridges, and those who are looking after humanitarian assistance whenever such an accident occurs. I think it would introduce new protocols. Immediately off the top of my head, I would say that in future, I'm sure that they would have tugs on standby, that in the event such a rarest of a rare accident occurs and a ship is blinded, a ship becomes deaf, that tugs are on standby to reach that particular vessel in quick time. Because normally, when you are transiting a restricted waterway and entering a port where there's a bridge, the speed would be very, I would say, slow. So there would be enough reaction time if you had tugs on standby to ensure that
right,
they in turn can either prevent the ship from colliding with the superstructure of the bridge, or ensure that some other action is taken to avert the disaster. Now, this is under normal circumstances.
right.
I am a security analyst, Zafar Saab. So,
Yeah,
my
yeah, I know.
first thoughts are also that what if this kind of an occurrence is triggered by an entity that chooses to use this as a weapon for
Right.
disruption? Now, we are aware that starting from 9/11, the world has
Yeah,
experienced what I would call as innovative thinking by non state actors
right.
to engage in acts that we normally describe as terrorism, but they end up in disruption, massive
Yeah,
disruption. Now, even now, Baltimore and what has happened because of Dali will lead to an immediate impact on the supply chain on the east coast of the United States of America. Because if you look at the geography of the east coast of the US,
yeah,
after New York, Baltimore is the closest and the major kind of port for supplies to reach that part of the US and into the hinterland. So I
right.
imagine that there would be a disruption for that particular thing. Now, if somebody were to do this in a devious manner
Yeah,
and use it as a means, I think this also has to be factored by security planners, those who are responsible for ports, and the entire merchant fleet of the world, which is now experiencing new challenges. For instance, the attack on merchant ships because of what is happening in Gaza, the
yeah,
Houthi attacks.
yeah,
All these are new, the use of drones.
yeah,
So I think the maritime domain is now lending itself to uh, very, I would say, important area for security planners to consider various possibilities and ensure that they can mitigate, reduce these kind of challenges in the event these are used by, as I said, non-state entities or anyone who wants to weaponize the maritime domain, particularly the merchant fleet. Zafar sir?
yeah. Thanks so much, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, for that perspective and for making us understand what exactly are the SOPs and how they are followed up through. Thanks for joining us today on our show, and thanks to our viewers for joining the Mojo Story. Thanks. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Zafar sir.